Howdy do.
Howdy do, young man.
Howdy do.
Howdy do.
Howdy do. Here we are at the Chinwag.
Have we alienated our Southern audience, which is substantial?
Oh, God, did we?
I don't think so. It was a tribute.
I wasn't necessarily. I thought it was more like, to me, that sounded more like the old, like, prospector out in, like, you know.
There's a snake in my boot.
Yeah, we just alienated Nevada. And
okay.
Yeah. So that's basically what we did. That guy, there's gold. That guy.
He deserves alienation, that guy.
Absolutely. I'm kind of sad that, well, I mean, my time may come when my time is approaching when I'm going to play that guy, probably. If somebody makes a Western, I figure if anybody ever makes a Western, I'm going to be one of three things. I'm going to be the asshole railroad baron who's like, Mrs. McGillicuddy, this railroad's coming through your farm whether you like it or not. You know, the guy with the watch and shit and the really fancy vest. Yes. That asshole. Or I'm going to be the fucking guy cleaning the mugs in the salon. that guy who just, but he whips up a shotgun. He does pull out a shotgun.
And the girls, the prostitutes all like him. He's just sort of a friendly fellow.
Indeed. And then I pull that thing out, or I'm going to be that guy. They're like, the guy like running into town, you know, like gold, silver, all that stuff, who I guess sort of shades into being the town drunk too. So it's like, I'm not, you know, but that's me. That's a Western.
Wasn't there an actor named like Gabby Hayes? And he took his teeth out and he's kind of this.
That's Gabby Hayes. Well, I think they're all. I think that's
your destiny, man.
Yeah, it is kind of my destiny.
That's where you're heading.
To become the 21st century Gabby Hayes. Gabby Hayes was the guy with the hat with the kind of flipped up in the front of the brim. But there were a couple of guys who did that. There was Walter Houston also did it, who's in Treasure of the Sierra Madre, and he's and there was Walter Brennan, who
all the Walters.
Walter Brennan, who was also and he's the guy who. He did two roles basically. He had two types of roles basically. One was teeth in, teeth out. One was he played guys with their teeth, or he popped his teeth out and then he played guys with no teeth. And that's what you're thinking. It was Walter. I think it was Walter. Yeah, I think it was Walter Brennan. It was like, what is his teeth in or teeth out? You know, and there's just like John Ford's like, pop your teeth out, Walter. And he just pops them out. Walter Brennan. Great actor, though. Really great actor.
Oh, man. Wait, I got to just ask you, since we're on this topic, is there a part that you're thinking like, this is going to be my, you know, when I'm in the autumn of my years,
I'm in the autumn of my years.
Okay, in the winter of your years, are you thinking like, that's going to be the part? Like, I can finally play that guy. You know what I mean?
Oh, it's a really good question. You mean like a famous role or something like that?
I guess like or a type of guy. Like I know you're interested in the kind of guy that like accidentally invents something amazing. I know that kind of guy interests you, right?
I do. That's kind of like backyard inventor. The guy who's like, I've invented a perpetual motion machine. You know that guy?
That's awesome.
I'd love to play that kind of guy. I don't know if there's a big market for that right now. That kind of movie.
Citizen scientist.
I'll tell you something I've always wanted to play. And actually, maybe I could now as I get older, I can play the sort of, I've always wanted to play a butler, like an English butler, because I want to play a guy
Jeeves.
I want to play, Jeeves would be great. I want to play a guy who doesn't talk much, calm, collected.
Knows things.
He knows things. Not a jackass. Like that would be fun to do. I would like to play it in English. And I think now I have my distinguished graying hair. I think that I could maybe do that.
I look forward to you in.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
In that role, sir.
And for all of you out there who are not asleep after listening to my little jaunt up and down Hollywood Boulevard, I would encourage you all to journey over to various cyber platforms and rate us and give us reviews, etc.
Yeah, we need the 5-star reviews on the interwebs because that helps people find the show, and that is really helpful to the show, and we appreciate that. And
it is.
And any kind of feedback.
It helps us rook in the suckers, is what it does. It helps us. No,
rook in the suckers.
It really is. It really is a good thing. And comments and questions, observations are more than welcome. Yes. And you can send questions and such type things to questions at chinwagpod.fm.
Yeah.
Is a nice place. You can see us on
We have
YouTube.
a very interesting community. I think our community is growing.
Yes.
And it's really kind of a cross-section of very diverse kinds of fans. It's really
Seems
fun.
like
so
it.
we're hearing from
it's
people.
Wonderful. Really nice people, too. Everybody seems like a nice person, which is really great. Well, Steve, here we are. Once again, it's just me and you, baby.
Yes. We are into the deep waters of the Chinwag.
Yep. We got into deep waters on the Chinwag. Today we're talking aquatic mysteries, mysteries of the deep. And that would include Atlantis and the Bermuda Triangle.
Yes.
And
not the usual stuff.
I hope not.
People, I think people tackle Atlantis and the Bermuda Triangle, but the Chinwag is going to take it in a whole new direction.
Okay.
And, there's new findings here that have never been revealed.
Oh, really? Oh, God, because I just dug up the same old shit I could find. And oh, shit. Okay. I'll do what I can to make it sound new.
I'm in the archives finding new stuff. I don't know about you, man.
You in fact are, and that's true. But Professor, I'm gonna open the floor and let you take it away.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.
am going to try to cover some interesting ground regarding Atlantis because I think that it is something everyone knows about, at least the name and the idea of a city that sank under the water. But the actual history of it is weirder and not well known. And then take it forward to even up to like current ideas, maybe we can, if there's time, maybe Madame Blavatsky, maybe Edgar Cayce, the sort of 20th century interest in, all things Atlantis.
Okay, I lowered the tone.
Here's what Plato says. He says that Atlantis was started by Poseidon. Poseidon had the hots for some human woman, as the gods often did, and he wants to have sex with her.
Right?
God of the ocean, Poseidon, exactly. He sequesters her on this island, which is somewhere in the what we now call the Atlantic. And Poseidon has a bunch of kids, has 5 twins, one of which is actually Atlas, and that's why the Atlantic is called, Atlas.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Oh, it's named for Atlas, who's the guy who then has to hold the earth up.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. And so the story, as Plato tells it, goes back. He says it was a real thing 9,000 years before he lived. So we're talking, that far back, 10,000, BC. And he says the Atlanteans started out as a beautiful, virtuous city under the guidance of Poseidon's children, but then they became corrupt. And they fought with ancient Athens. And those two had a war. And as they were fighting this war, there was a terrible earthquake. And the ancient Athenians were actually buried into the soil of Greece. And the ancient Atlanteans were actually buried into the sea at the same time. And that was just the end of both of them.
Weird. Oh, so the Athenians also disappeared.
Yes.
Oh, I didn't know that.
According to this story, yeah.
So how come nobody gives a shit about them? How come
Exactly.
Nobody cares about them. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
And is there a reason, like, were one of them better than the other? Was one like the good guys and one the bad guys?
Yeah. So now the interesting thing about it is that Plato's written another book prior to this called The Republic, which many people are familiar with, and that's the ideal city, the first utopia. So that's the perfect society. And in it, he thinks you have to have virtue and the philosophers will rule, as of course they should.
Yeah, that's right.
But here's what they say, like in these other dialogues, they're like, well, what would happen if everything went wrong? And Atlantis is a story about how the virtuous city goes wrong and becomes corrupt. And so what happens is they start out fine, and they're enacting this virtue that the Greeks really love called sophrosyne, and it means temperance, like you know your place and you keep your appetites in control. But what happens in Atlantis...
You're not boozing, you're not partying, you're just like...
Then they start... in Atlantis, they start boozing and start carousing and start acting on their craving, and most importantly, they start to have imperialist pretensions. They want to go and invade other lands and take their stuff. And
Oh.
that's what leads to their downfall.
And that's bad. In Plato's
Yes.
mind, this is a mistake.
Yes,
Don't be doing
huge
that.
mistake.
Oh, okay.
So they are punished. In Critias, it looks like Zeus is going to do the punishing, but it ends so suddenly that no one quite knows what role Zeus is going to play. But that's the belief, is that the Atlantis was awesome, became corrupt, and then sank because it gave in to its craving and appetites and didn't follow its own rationality. Yeah.
Uh-huh. And is this Plato's idea is like, this is kind of what can happen in cultures and stuff like that?
Exactly.
We can all go down the tubes if we don't like bang down too much wild turkey and get out there, and we gotta be moderate. We gotta be okay.
Yeah. People think he might have been talking to contemporary Athens at the time and telling them, hey, don't get, because they were at that point building up a huge naval power, that eventually, and they'd been fighting the Carthaginians and shit. And he was basically saying, look, don't become imperialists. Just stay within your boundaries and you'll be okay.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know. That's interesting. Okay.
So then what's interesting is it gets revitalized in the Renaissance period. And some of this literature too. I know you're into the Renaissance stuff. Thomas More writes Utopia, and that's in 1516, which is sort of about discovering almost like an Atlantis. And then a few years later, Francis Bacon writes a short book, which is one of my favorite books of all time. It's actually called The New Atlantis.
Okay,
and that's in 1626.
And they're taking up the idea of Atlantis and now saying like, here's an ideal state. Like here's the way for us to live now.
I think the original one was here's what not to do. But in these Renaissance and early modern ones, it's almost like, look how much better we could be. Like as Europeans, we've got some cool shit, but we've also got some stupid, imperialist
because
tendencies.
That's the thing. In my mind, Atlantis to me, so it's funny here you say that it was set up as the failure, as the thing that was bad, that went wrong. Because in my mind, it's like Atlantis is like, I mean, please.
Awesome.
It's just like everybody's running around in Speedos and bikinis and like everything is, and people
with
can
PhDs.
Fly. People are flying machines and electricity and like, it's like this amazing advanced, which I'm sure you'll get to because that must come later, that all that like crazy mythology. But that's funny that originally it was not a good thing.
Atlantis does show itself to have amazing abilities in engineering and architecture. So Plato does praise it. And they terraform, dams and lakes and shit.
Really?
But then they lose their way. And I think in the Renaissance, it goes back to being this kind of idealism. Like we could be so much better. Like I actually read Thomas More's Utopia not that long ago. And a lot of people are down on the Europeans like, oh, we were just, raping and pillaging and burning, all around the world. But More's Utopia is like, this place we could be like much smarter. We could be more virtuous. We could have more, like everyone's a vegetarian there. They don't eat animals.
Interesting.
Like there's no slavery there, or, like it's redefining what society could be. And in the New Atlantis, Francis Bacon says, like, you go there and it's like, remember, like, he's writing this in 1626 and the Pilgrims arrive in America on the Mayflower in 1620. So it's like 6 years apart.
Interesting.
So you're discovering the new world, and they're like, this could either be like filled with people who are less civilized than us, or maybe more civilized than us, which is really cool.
Wow, weird.
Yeah.
That's interesting. And so was he talking about America as a new Atlantis? Was he saying this is a place it's a metaphor and it's a real place potentially now?
Some people took it as a metaphor and some people think he was using it metaphorically. He doesn't name it as America. He treats it like it's this other place that they found in the ocean. That's like, because I mean, I think when Europeans meet Native American culture, they're kind of underwhelmed by them. They're like, oh, these guys don't have science.
They're not these.
Yeah. Whereas we now understand that this is just a cultural difference, and I think Europeans couldn't see the wisdom within Native American traditions.
No, definitely not.
But a lot of these writers, and our boy Athanasius Kircher also made a map of Atlantis.
The Hollow Earth guy.
Yeah, yes. See that episode, listener. Gentle listener.
Athanasius Kircher is this fantastic wackadoodle guy with all these crazy theories about stuff.
Yeah, he's
fantastic. So naturally he would hook onto Atlantis.
Exactly, Atlantis.
So he made a map. Sorry, he made a map of Atlantis?
He made a map of Atlantis, fucking making it up.
He's just making it up. He's just full on making it up. God, I love that. That's fantastic.
I love that guy too. And then we get to the stuff that I think is more recent, which is in 1882, this guy Ignatius L. Donnelly writes a book called Atlantis, the Antediluvian World. And I have a feeling you know this guy.
I've heard of this guy. I've heard of this guy, yes. And I think I've even tried to read the book. It's long.
Okay.
It's a lot.
I have not read it, but I knew
I've tried to read it. It's
this
amazing.
Is your
it's
wheelhouse.
One of these things in the 1800s. These guys that crank these things out, and it's kind of amazing. It's like Mormonism's a whole other thing we could talk about sometime. But I'm always amazed that I'm like, whatever you have to say about Joseph Smith, the guy wrote this fucking whole book. He wrote the Book of Mormon. I mean,
it's crazy.
Pull it out of his head, whatever. It's kind of amazing.
God wrote the book, Paul.
Well,
I don't know what you're talking.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, that's right. But I mean, this guy sits down and writes a long book about this thing.
Yeah. And then it takes off like in the late 1800s.
And he was like a senator too or something.
Yes. I think that's right. He was a populist politician in Minnesota. And then Madame Blavatsky, we've talked about the Theosophical Society before. These are folks in the late 19th century in America who are they're sort of synthesizing Eastern ideas, mysticism, the new science. And she starts talking about, in a book called The Secret Doctrine, this is 1888, that Atlantis was real. And instead of like a city, it was actually it wasn't an island, it was a continent, she claims.
Oh. And
our human species is descended from these Atlanteans, and that Atlantis lasted for thousands of years. This is according to Madame Blavatsky.
Right.
And there's all this, again, sort of like the hollow earth theory. There's all this weird racial theory involved too.
Yeah.
Who's descended from the Atlanteans? And then Edgar Cayce, who's a sort of would you call him a medium?
He's a kind of medium. He was called the sleeping prophet, kind of a psychic, a medium, clairvoyant, I guess. I mean, he would go into these trance states, and a lot of the time he would offer up remedies for people's ills. He would be like, if you wrap, sorghum poultice with ragweed and blah 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 and eat it, you will no longer have headaches. But apparently a lot of stuff worked.
Was he trading on like herbal wisdom, or was he just sort of getting lucky?
I think so, but a lot of it was people were like, I can't rub lye in my eyes. That won't, and then they would do it, and then they were fine. It was like, he's mad, but it that was me. That was my little mini Edgar Cayce biopic. But that's a whole other subject that hopefully we get into someday. But he did this stuff, and I think some of it was sort of known kind of stuff, but some of it was like seemingly bonkers, and it really helped people. But as you're about to say, he got into other stuff too.
He got into Atlantis, and he thought that he sort of in these trance states thought that Atlantis was a predecessor to human civilization, and he thought it was connected to racial theories. Polygyny is the idea that there are many Adam and Eves, not just one. So this is a weird theory.
I've never even heard this. What's it called?
It's called polygyny, like means many origins.
Oh.
And it's contrasted with, like, Blavatsky was a monogynist, which meant there's one origin of the human species. Oh. So you have a debate between the monogenists and the polygynists. And they were like...
Never heard this.
Yeah,
Amazing.
It's really interesting.
Okay, keep going.
So either it was really important during the sort of pre-Civil War, the antebellum period, on the debates on slavery, because if you believed in one Adam and Eve, then white people, black people, people from Asia were all brothers and sisters. Yeah, we're all cousins. But if you believe in separate, like, origin stories, then we're not of the same species. And so many of the Polygenists were actually pro-slavery, and it was very complicated.
Yeah. No,
but all that get mixed up with Atlantis in the late 1800s, early 1900s. And Casey is one of those people, and it basically, now it's sort of all over the map. And it's hard to keep track of it. It's made its way into popular culture.
Sure.
But that's basically my sort of little 101 course.
That's amazing.
On Atlantis.
So Edgar Casey didn't have some whole thing about like Jesus was in Atlantis, did he? Did that like overlap?
Apparently, Blavatsky thought that the Aryans were descended from Atlantis, but she had a very broad idea about the Aryans. It wasn't like the German idea where it was just like, but it looks like Casey thought that actually, interestingly, he said there were 5 races, and he said it's the red race.
Yeah.
This was so old school.
Jesus.
It was the red race. Presumably he meant Native Americans were the descendants of Atlantis. So that's interesting.
Interesting. And what about all the what about all the sort of, I mean, there's a lot of like UFO shit. There's a lot, I mean, it does connect to the Hollow Earth. There's a lot of like alien technology shit.
Yes.
I mean,
apparently Casey said there was a laser that was used on Atlantis,
oh my God,
and that
really?
we were going to discover that.
Laser?
He said we were going to discover that for real, like in the decades to come. Like nothing. I mean, I don't know how you interpret that, but he was making a prediction. Yeah,
a big old fucking laser beam, and so because I know that there's all kinds of stuff like that. But what about also? Isn't there a lot of people thinking they've now identified where it is too? I mean, there's a huge sort of like
people who
cottage industry of people going like, I found it and I know where it is. And right.
Yeah. Like none of this is compelling. I got to be honest with you because I mean, the story is compelling.
Yes, okay.
But I think Plato made this up. So like everything, I love the way it works in culture, but if you think you're going to find Atlantis, I think you're just confused. That's just my own take. But isn't there some thinking that it might be a kind of cultural memory of a big cataclysm that happened way before, like a big volcano? Isn't there some, this is all vague shit that I vaguely know about this or remember. Isn't there some idea that they think some humongous volcanic explosion that actually was a really cataclysmic global event? That sounds... I've seen that theory. I got to say, I don't remember enough to say, but I do know that that's a common, like many people interpret the flood of Noah's flood and the ark as a kind of reference to a real, flood. And you'll see this in many other cultures besides the Semitic traditions too.
There was some humongous volcanic eruption that caused like an ash cloud that they think had to do to change the weather and stuff like that on the planet. I mean, I'm talking like way before any of this stuff, that there's some, like you're saying, there's some weird memory of this that
like
gets
10,000 years ago. Like when Plato
that gets like
tells
legendized and turned into some vague idea.
Oh, that's possible.
Yeah. Or even the idea of some golden age thing too is sort of cool.
Yeah.
It's like,
I like that idea too.
Yeah. That there was some way in which, that there was and I think, is it the Minoans or something? There's some other culture that they think, were these the people they thought were the Atlanteans? Because
I've heard that too, like, and Phoenicians maybe, because Phoenicians are like originally from like the Lebanon area, but they were amazingly good at navigating the Mediterranean and maybe out into the Atlantic, and they settled Carthage. And so the Greeks thought of the Phoenicians as being very superior culturally or in terms of civilization. So maybe. And
they're a kind of seagoing people. And they have and I feel like it's maybe the Minoans. I love how fucking vague and uncertain I am about this. This is hilarious. I'm just spreading this shit like, I think the Minoans were somewhat advanced. Okay. I think they had like central air, like the Romans had much later. They had like, they would run like warm air under the floor and stuff like that to warm. They would find ways to sort of like do stuff like the plumbing and stuff like that. I think the Minoans,
waterways.
Yeah, which was clearly like, they're geniuses. They have a crapper. They invented the crapper. And it's
they
like
have plumbing.
Exactly.
Are they aliens? They have plumbing.
Totally. Well, I mean, it's a super rich and crazy thing.
Yeah.
And I feel like almost every wackadoodle, why am I saying it's wackadoodle? I mean, I believe a lot of this shit. What am I doing? What am I saying? But
every person like yourself.
Every interesting theory somehow ties back to Atlantis. I feel like it becomes,
I mean, look at comic book culture and Namor, you know, like the sort of like that there's
Prince Namor.
Prince Namor, there's a world. So it made its way into popular culture in really cool ways.
For sure, but I feel like UFOs, I feel like, have you ever seen those things? The crystal skulls and all this shit. And the Hollow Earth thing, like a lot of it goes back. Atlantis becomes this root cause of a lot of this shit, it seems like.
Yeah.
There are ways in which people take it to be the root cause of what I'm about to embark on. The mystery of the deep that I'm about to delve into, which is the Bermuda Triangle, a.k.a. the Devil's Triangle.
Oh, man.
And but there one sort of, not explanation, but definitely a thing people tie it to is Atlantis. There's a lot of people who are like, oh, it's because Atlantis was there.
Really?
And
I didn't know that.
It's this kind of spot that's rich with weird vibes and weird, and because the Atlanteans were there with, weird forces. And that would be, yes, the Bermuda Triangle, Steve. The Devil's Triangle, which is an area covering roughly from the tip of Florida to Bermuda down to San Juan, Puerto Rico, is the basic idea of it. That's the area.
That's a huge area.
It's a huge area. And an interesting thing that as more I looked into this is that over the years, lots of commentators on the Bermuda Triangle tend to make it a pretty fucking elastic triangle.
Oh, they're moving it around.
It can stretch pretty fucking far to cover, because you're like, some guy disappeared near Ireland? That's the Bermuda Triangle. And it really is, actually. There's one school of thought that it stretches that far. And it's like, so, I mean, it's elastic. It's elastic to say the least. But again, I'm going to just do a quick, an interesting, I found this, the first article that sort of mentions this as a spot of concern on the globe. Dateline, Miami Herald, 17th September, 1950. E.V.W. Jones is writing this. Edward Van Winkle Jones, the appropriately named. And he says, it's a small world? No. It's still the same vast globe the ancients knew, with the same misty limbo of the lost.
Why don't newspaper writers write like this anymore?
Isn't that
man?
fantastic?
This is great. I'm sorry to interrupt you. But
I wish I could open my New York Times and see this shit instead of what I have to read. We think it's small because of speeding wheels and wings and the voice of radio which comes out of the void. A mile is only a minute's travel by wheel or a few seconds in flight, but it is still a mile. The miles add up to a vast unknown, into which 100 and more persons have flown or sailed with brief memory, to be swallowed up just as ships were swallowed up in the old sailing days. And he goes along to sort of just mention a bunch of these disappearances, which I'll talk about. But it's such a great piece. And at the end of it, he says, these and other modern mysteries have established a roll of about 135 persons who went forth confidently into a world they thought small, but it is the same big world the ancients knew, into which men and their machines and ships can disappear without a trace. But I like the way that he's sort of saying this modern world of ours is still a place that we don't know what the fuck is really going on.
It's awesome.
Which is really kind of great. So anyway, that's his thing. And a little bit later, it got picked up on by other people. And in 1964, in this men's magazine, which they don't really have these either. It wasn't like Playboy. It was called Argosy. And it was kind of this like men's adventure, like kind of adventure stories and stuff like that for men. And a guy named Vincent Gaddis coins the term Bermuda Triangle. And he's the guy who sort of invents it. But
what year is it?
1964. So it's well along in terms of it being made into an actual thing. But he's a somewhat dubious character. He's a big self-proclaimed expert on spontaneous human combustion as well. And so he's a dubious guy, and a lot of people A lot of people take them apart. And by the way, all of this has been, that I'm going to detail, has been picked the fuck apart by people. And, nobody.
By skeptics.
But yeah. And what they have to say is very simple and often correct. And then it was actually picked up upon the guy that kind of introduced it to me as a child, is this guy, Charles Berlitz, who's an interesting figure in himself.
I know that name.
Yeah, well, he's the son of this guy who invented the Berlitz language schools, which was this simple way to learn. It's like early Rosetta Stone. Is that the easy way to learn Russian kind of thing? So he started these schools that were this kind of quick and easy way to learn languages. And Charles Berlitz as a child, he's a very eccentric guy. But he was raised, his father raised him. He was raised with wealth. So his father raised him. Every servant spoke a different language to him as a child.
Come on.
Yeah. And the parents spoke different languages. So the poor fucking kid is walking around all day and people are speaking Urdu to him. And he's just like, holy shit. You got one guy speaking French. He's got another guy speaking Serbo-Croat to him. So he learned he had a command of a bazillion languages.
Wow.
By the time he became an adult. But he's a very eccentric guy. And in preparation for this, I urge everyone within the sound of my voice to watch a 1977 BBC documentary on the Internet Archive called The Case of the Bermuda Triangle, because he's in it, speaking in it. And boy, is he a dubious character. And he's a guy, talk about a biopic for me someday. But he wrote these kind of very famous popular books about it. There's the kind of thing that I was really into as a kid when I was into this stuff. I'm still into this stuff, but when I was reading this stuff as a kid for the first time. But in fact, a lot of this, the idea of it goes back to the 1800s.
Oh, really?
We got the USS Pickering, a Navy schooner, vanishes en route to the West Indies from Boston. 91 people lost, never found. This is the other thing. And it is weird that a lot of this stuff is never found. You got a thing called the Ellen Austin, 1881. But that turns out to be a completely made-up boat. And then you've got the HMS Atalanta, leaves Bermuda, disappears, probably in a storm. But it gets drawn, all these things get drawn into the later 20th century myth of this.
I see.
Thing.
People go back and grab them and pull them up.
Exactly. People start, like I say, it's elastic. Not just geographically, but in time. People start going back. And in fact, there's people who are tracing all the way back to Columbus. Who's sailing over and saying he's seeing weird lights in this area. He's seeing things dropping out, fiery things dropping out of the sky. And Columbus identifies for the first time the Sargasso Sea, which I'm going to talk about as I get along with it a little bit later, which is within the Bermuda Triangle. I'm sorry. I'm trying to be as succinct as possible here, Steve. The Sargasso Sea, which is within the Bermuda Triangle, which I always thought was mythical, but it's real. And it's this part of the triangle where there's a confluence of currents. So boats get becalmed there very easily. And there's a thick carpet of this stuff called sargassum, which is this weed that grows there.
Really?
So it's a famous area of the ocean for sailors where you can get stuck.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And so it becomes a part of the mythos of the Bermuda Triangle too, this mysterious area called the Sargasso Sea. But anyway, it really kicks off with this thing, the USS Cyclops, which is a transport ship for the Navy, carrying coal and other kinds of things, ores and stuff like that. Leaves Barbados for Baltimore, supposed to get there, but it disappears completely. 306 crew, passengers, biggest loss of life in U.S. naval history. That's non-combat situation.
Wow.
And absolutely not a piece of this thing is ever found. Still,
oh my God,
nobody's ever found this thing, which always remains the weird thing to me. But there's theories that it was overladen. There was too much in the hold of the ship and stuff like that. But one thing that develops with that's an interesting little tidbit I found is that the captain of the USS Cyclops, Commander George W. Worley, turns out to actually be Johann Friedrich Winkelmann, who is a German guy who's illegally in America, who changed his name.
Oh, shit.
And joined the Navy. And he's apparently a bananas. He's a nut job.
Oh, my God.
And he's on the ship. He's threatening the sailors all the time. And he was known to wander about the ship in his underwear wearing a derby hat. And but there's some thinking, was he a spy?
Yeah, did he take it down?
Well, there's some thinking, was he a spy? Was he a saboteur? Did he hand the ship over to the Germans? And this is end of World War I, this 1918. Or did he let them torpedo it? Stuff like that. But here's the really weird thing. That disappears. Then many years later in the Second World War, The sister ships of the Cyclops, built along with them and repurposed to be used in the Second World War, the Proteus and the Nereus, also disappear. They also vanish into the Bermuda Triangle, which is super weird. And no German U-boats claim them. Nothing claims them. They just vanished. And again, a lot of the time there's bad weather. There's stuff like that that can explain a lot of these things.
Yeah, that's one of my questions is, and I'm sure going to get to this, but
oh yes,
is there just some fucking crazy weather pattern there that just is?
There's different theories that all make sense, but let me just detail a few more.
Oh yeah, please.
Disappearances. I'm really, bear with me. I was thinking maybe I should get a shirt that says "Bear with me" on it. I should just Chinwag on the back and then "Bear with me." 1921, another ship, the Carol Deering, goes down. And that one has an interesting detail of a hoaxed message in a bottle that a guy finds later, but turns out to be a hoax. 1925, the SS Cotopaxi disappears. And that's actually, do you remember in Close Encounters of the Third Kind, that movie? In the beginning of that movie, they find the ship in the desert that's sitting in the middle of the Gobi Desert. There's a scene in that where
are you telling me
it's the Cotopaxi. In that shot, you see the name of the ship, and it's the Cotopaxi.
Oh my God.
Spielberg's into stuff like this.
Wow, that's great.
1967, a very famous one, December 22nd, a cabin cruiser, a little yacht called the Witchcraft with two guys on it. One of them's a priest. They're lost only a mile offshore in Miami. They were only a mile offshore. 20 minutes between when they gave a distress signal and the Coast Guard shows up, they're gone.
Really?
And again, also it was apparently unsinkable. This boat had all these safety devices. It's gone. Again, there's some thinking that it got stormy. There's some thinking in this instance too, which becomes a whole theory of smugglers, of the Bermuda Triangle smugglers, and of apparently these drug runners and stuff who are maybe hijacking people and taking their boats and stuff like that. Yeah. So that's that, but that's an interesting one. I was curious how recent stuff is, and as recent as 2015 with maritime stuff. 2 kids were lost off Bermuda. A thing called the SS El Taro, a merchant marine ship, sank. They found it, though, in a hurricane. But those are still being attributed. So
what about planes? I was thinking about planes.
It's funny you should ask, Steve. Funny you should ask. 1945 is when the airplanes start disappearing.
Oh.
And the famous one is Flight 19, which is the first one that goes missing, which is this training flight with these 5 torpedo bombers, and they vanish. They're on this simple training exercise. They leave Fort Lauderdale. They're going to bomb something called the Chicken Rocks. They're going to practice bombing on some formation called the Chicken Rocks. I liked that. The compasses go out. And this is also something that gets talked about a lot, that people's compasses and their guidance devices on ships and planes start going out. The guys start getting lost. The leader of the thing gets really lost, and he seems to be leading the others astray. He thinks that he's gone further west than he actually has, so that what actually is happening is they're just going out to sea more and more and more, and they vanish. Nobody ever sees them again.
That's crazy.
Allegedly, there's crazy messages coming through where they're saying things like, the sea, the ocean, it looks strange, it looks white. It's turning white and stuff like that, none of which apparently is true. That all these sort of like last messages of Flight 19 apparently are not true. But they vanish, and here's the other weird thing. They send out a huge patrol plane to find them, and that disappears.
Really?
Without a trace. Some people speculate it exploded because there's fishermen saw a fireball in the sky, so they think that thing exploded. But still, none of it was ever found.
Jesus Christ.
I mean, that's weird. As much as you can sit here and go, there's other explanations, it's all fucking weird.
Yeah.
Like, it's really strange. So there's a bunch of these other things. There's DC-3s go down, all kinds of things going down.
I wonder if there's like some kind of magnetic anomaly in this area that like fucks up your instrumentation, and then
one thing that's
screwed up.
It's one thing that people posit, that it's like there's a theory that there's some magnetic thing that's causing it. There's stuff about crazy currents that are causing it. What else is there? There's lots of different explanations. Human error is one that people are constantly talking about. Rogue waves, which are these crazy giant waves that form that can overwhelm things. There's something called methane hydrates, which is a thought, which is it's a form of natural gas, Steve, eruptions of this gas. They're called mud volcanoes. I guess it's naturally occurring methane that builds up and it creates this huge bubble that blows. And it causes what sounds like a sinkhole in the ocean. Like this big yawning chasm will open under a boat and it could sink. It could potentially swallow a boat really fast. And so, but apparently there aren't, the U.S. Geological Survey says there's not a whole lot of methane hydrate in that area. So it might not be that. But one of the explanations is also this Sargasso Sea thing, and which is the currents and this sort of like this stuff that causes ships to get foundered and stuff like that. Which, if you'll indulge me with a quick sidebar to this, I'm going to take this another direction just because there's a really fascinating story that goes along with that, with the idea of the Sargasso Sea.
Just quickly, that anything that's happening in the water would explain, of course, the loss and disappearance of the ships, but the planes seem like they can't be captured by that same causal pattern. There has to be something else going on.
No, but I think with the explanation, there's a lot of the magnetic stuff, storms, human error, stuff like that.
It looks like it's one thing, but it's really a bunch of different phenomena maybe.
That's one explanation. There's a scientist also who said, basically, given the amount of marine and air traffic through this area anyway, relative to how much is going on, not that many people have actually disappeared. Relative to how much marine and air traffic there is in other heavily trafficked ocean areas of the world, it's not extraordinary. As many things have disappeared, just as many disappearances have happened in these other places. So that's that guy's very simple solving of the problem, is he's like, it happens all over the place.
Yeah, okay. We're focusing on it and making it into something, but it really is just the common problems of
Indeed. But it raises the specter of multiple triangles, Steve. Maybe the planet is just
covered in triangles,
dotted with horrible, with
wherever there's a guy
triangles.
getting beat up by a cop, there's a triangle.
Exactly. It's just that it could raise that specter. But I just want to talk about one thing because it's fascinating to me. It's a really good story, and it's one of the big. It's a big Bermuda Triangle story that is related to the Sargasso Sea, but people use this as and it's a story of this guy, Donald Crowhurst. Have you ever heard of this guy?
I have not.
I became fascinated with this guy a few years ago, and I just want to talk about this guy briefly. In the 60s, I can't remember what year, but in the 60s, the Sunday Times of London sponsored what they wanted to be the first single-handed around-the-world yacht race. So it was going to be the first solo circumnavigation in a yacht. And nobody had done it up to that point. So it was a big contest. So all these guys entered, all these famous sailors. And this guy named Donald Crowhurst decides he's going to enter it. And he's a kind of strange, troubled guy. He's a weekend sailor. He doesn't even really, he's kind of an amateur sailor. He's not really a great sailor. But he has this business selling marine and navigation equipment. So his business is failing. And he goes, you know what? I'm going to enter this thing. I'm going to enter this thing and I'm going to build my own fucking boat.
I love these guys.
I know. And so he builds this trimaran. He builds his own boat on his own sort of specifications. He's got all these theories about how this is going to work. And he's going to install all these safety devices of his own invention into these things. And the whole thing's going to be a kind of business venture. It's going to show how good his shit is and how he knows what he's doing. But he really is not a very skilled guy. And he can't navigate for shit, apparently, either. This poor guy. So he goes off, he sails off, he gets to the South Atlantic and begins to realize he's fucked. He's lost. And he keeps kind of pulling into places to sort of repair the fucking boat, which is falling apart, and everything is falling apart. And the poor guy is starting to go, I'm literally in over my head. I'm fucked. This is going badly. So he decides what he's going to start doing is falsifying his reports. He starts to speculate about falsifying his logs. But what he actually starts doing is falsifying his radio reports because they're supposed to check in by radio.
I see.
So he starts bullshitting about where he is on the planet.
Like he's making better progress.
He's making way better progress than he's actually supposed to be making. So he begins to construct this pretty elaborate fantasy. It's unclear whether he actually started writing fake logbooks, but what happens is the other guy's racing, one of them, who I also want to talk about in a minute, he decides, fuck it, I'm just going to sail around the South Pacific for a while because this is awesome. And then another guy sort of falls behind and the guys are falling behind. The way he's fake positioning himself, he's in place to win the race now. So it's like he's fucked himself because he's like, now I have to win the race or at least be second. So he's kind of fucked himself over. And so he starts realizing either I win the race or I reveal I faked it. And what also starts happening is he begins to kind of lose his mind.
Oh,
he starts to go crazy. He starts to have a breakdown. He starts becoming more paranoid. There's some speculation he was already maybe suffered from some sort of condition, bipolar, but he starts losing his mind. And he's literally sailing in circles after a while. In the Sargasso Sea, and he gets becalmed. And he starts writing a philosophy.
Well, what is becalmed exactly? Like, what
you
does
can't,
that mean?
the wind dies and you're done.
Okay, you're just,
the boat is just, you're fucked because the wind dies. And
you're
stuck there. And he's stuck in the Sargasso Sea, which is this thick weed everywhere too, which can sort of, a little boat like this. So he starts writing down his philosophy. He has revelations in the boat, and he starts having revelations about the nature of reality. And he starts having conversations with Einstein and God. And he starts positing that life is a game with a capital G. It's this game run by gods and demons. But if you can become a second generation cosmic being, you can step outside of the game and stuff like that. And he starts losing his mind.
Amazing.
And whether or not he killed himself or not is not entirely known. But when they finally, he never arrived again. They went out to find him. They found the boat without him on it.
Oh, he's missing.
Totally gone. No trace of him has ever been found.
Oh my God.
He disappears. And it's a big one with the Bermuda Triangle because people are like, he lost his mind because it's the Bermuda Triangle.
Wow.
And it's like, and he vanished because it's the Bermuda Triangle, and all this weird shit he was saying is sort of like,
wait, remind me, what year are we talking? Or approximately 60s? Okay.
I think sort of the mid to late 60s. But it's a story I find fascinating.
Yeah, there is this phenomenon that of people who are navigating like a craft of some kind, like a captain, and they lose their minds. It's kind of a common trope. You see it every now and then.
Very much so. But it's like this guy really literally legitimately just kind of went bonkers.
I wonder
and
if
it's a sad story too. And it becomes one of those, I mean, people think but it becomes one of those classic things of where it's almost like nobody remembers who won the race. Everybody remembers this
Everybody remembers this guy.
Yeah, and it's like the guys racing to the South Pole. It's like Scott and Amundsen. Like nobody remembers that Amundsen got to the South Pole.
Wow.
Everybody remembers Scott losing his mind and dying. But the classic thing is, one of the guys who was in place to win was this French guy named Bernard Moitessier, who had his own religious experience while he was sailing.
Really?
And he suddenly realized that he didn't want to go back to dry land because it was this human culture was horrible and materialistic. And so as he was approaching to win the race, he said, fuck it. And he sailed around again.
Really?
Yep. He set out to fucking do it again. And I think he only made it 2/3 of the way. And to this day, I think it's still the longest single-handed journey anybody's ever made.
Really?
The guy decided, he would just keep sailing.
God, that's fascinating. That's fascinating.
So anyway, there's all those anomalies and things like that. And again, there's like,
what is your own theory?
Well, it dovetails also into Atlantis too, because there's all this stuff about the Bimini Wall, which is this thing that they found in Bimini in the Bahamas, Barbados, I can't remember, which is these blocks that look like an enormous road that's under the ground, but some people think it's a natural formation and people think it's Atlantis, and it coincides with the Bermuda Triangle, and there's people who think it's all like,
And I think there's in this area
the underground UFOs of Atlantis are coming up and snatching these people away.
And recently there's like, I think in this area there are these rocks that are basically like, we're always trying to find the right minerals in order to make computer components. And so like the current global economy is sort of oriented towards like Taiwan, and this is a big struggle, but there's some work now where they're trying to dredge up these rocks that are right in this area near the Caribbean, and then they're mining this, like they're sort of scraping the seafloor in order to gather these together and then turn these into computer chips and shit.
That's because it was Atlantis. That's because it's the detritus of Atlantis.
That is what I'm saying.
Yeah. And I mean, and there's a lot, and actually down there too, where the Bimini Wall is, there's also, they think it's a location of the Fountain of Youth too, I think. They think that it's like...
It all comes together.
It all does come together. And again, that's what I mean. It's like, it's kind of baseline like Atlantis. It's like this baseline crazy theory that underlies everything. That's sort of...
I think the thing about this that I like is that there's something about all these stories that makes it seem like, the traditional story you learn in school about the history of the development of culture, of progress. There's another story that's even before that you don't learn in school, that's mysterious. And I just love that. I don't know whether it's true. I kind of doubt that it is, but it's super exciting.
No, I love that too. And I mean, that's what that stuff is. It's all this stuff we talk about is this like secret knowledge.
Yes,
thing,
secret knowledge. There's
that's
a secret
like that
history.
predates everything. And it's imaginatively fun. But it's that thing of we can separate the fact and the fiction, though, is the thing. But I don't think a lot of people, in some cases, yes, in some cases. But I think a problem arises when you can't, and you start to not be able to sort of like separate the two things out, But it's also,
and I think the place where you can see this when you're not sure whether the gray area is going to deliver truth or just like fiction, it's places like these geographical zones, like where ships disappear. I mean, that crazy case where that flight that was on its way, I believe, to China from the South Seas. This was back in 2014. They've still never found it. Yeah,
they still haven't found it.
300 people or something on that plane.
How is that possible to find nothing? And again, in this day and age, when you can find, I can see I can look into my bathroom from a satellite. Google. I mean, I can see anything. You know what I mean? It's like, I can find anything. I can find somebody buried their cat in the woods down in Virginia somewhere. It's like, I mean, it's like you can find anything and you can't locate. It's really bizarre to me.
Yeah, that is bizarre.
Yeah, and I think that's a super exciting part of it is this like the unknown, the disappearance thing is for some reason really fascinating. And the unsolved vanishing.
Yeah, modern culture says there's a grid and everybody has a place on that grid, and there's a kind of technology that can find you on that grid. And then these stories come along like the Bermuda Triangle or these disappearing planes, and they're like, you know what? Just like you started when you were quoting that newspaper article, the world is still big. It's not small.
That's great. The world is still this place where you can slip through the cracks.
Yeah, right.
I often wonder about, I used to have a kind of fantasy as a kid of like disappearing, of vanishing, of like erasing yourself and you can vanish. And I just don't, it must be so hard to do now.
Probably
I think at one time it was pretty easy to do, actually. Yeah. I mean, even well into the 20th century, it was probably pretty easy to do. But it's got to be really hard to do now. To actually vanish.
I would meet these guys when I was living in Cambodia. This is 20 years ago. I would meet these guys. I would just be at a bar and you meet these guys and you know that they have some horrible past and some weird history and they're trying to start over where no one knows who they are.
Yeah.
But nowadays there's some like credit card record or some, you know what I mean? Like there's
any number of things. Like there's so many records and so many ways to trace you and such a footprint and fingerprint you leave behind that I don't know that you can get away with it. And the idea of being able to do it now, that's kind of extraordinary.
Yeah.
Like if you can disappear now, that's really cool. Which is why I was wondering, like, does it, and I don't think now with the Bermuda Triangle, something disappears, they can find it. The two boys who disappeared off the coast of Bermuda, they found the boat. They just didn't find the kids. And it's like, and the kids, who knows what happened to them? But it's like,
well, look at the case where there was that little submarine that went down in and was going to look at the remains of the Titanic, and it was like this wealthy group, and we did find this field of detritus, that was the result of an implosion. But we could have easily not found that. We could have easily never known what happened to those guys. And that's a common creepy reality is like,
well, because it's also the fact of the matter is, and the reality is that at the depths of that, the depths of the ocean are as unknown and as mysterious and as bizarre as outer space. Oh, Steve, the mysteries of the deep. The mysteries of the abyss, Steve.
Yes, my sort of bête noire, the thing I'm most afraid of is the deep. Yeah.
Yep. Who knows what's down there? Yep. I just saw, again, too, there was something recently about some sort of robot submarine just discovered hundreds of undiscovered species of fish down there. Yeah, there's some. I just read this somewhere.
Are they creepy looking?
Yeah, they're weird looking. They're super weird looking because everything down there is weird looking.
Yeah, everything down there.
And that's the thing. The thing is that we didn't even get to a lot of the weird creatures of the deep. We just talked about this stuff, which is like mythic and paranormal and insane, when there's actually just real weird shit that's alive down there.
It's true.
Squids and all that kind of creatures. So next week we have another episode.
Stay tuned. Stay tuned. That's right.
Yes, indeed. We're going to talk giant squids and all other kinds of creepy things like that.
It's funny, like you go down deep in the ocean, you never see something that looks like a trout or a bass. It always looks kind of horrifying.
Yeah, because I don't think it can survive down there. I think a trout or a bass explodes
down there. Yeah,
just immediately explode. These things have to be like armored and like they're structured really weirdly.
Or just jelly.
Or just jelly, Which, jellyfish, that's a whole other thing. Don't even, it's jellyfish.
Shimmering blobs.
Yeah, shimmering blobs.
There's a callback to episode 1.
No eyes, creatures with no eyes freak me out. I can't. Worms and jellyfish, no, those are the stuff of nightmare. And we'll bring you more stuff of nightmare next week in the continuing Chinwag episodes about mysteries of the deep. And actually, don't forget, in 2 days, we're going to bring you a bonus wag.
Bonus wag, people.
Bonus wag, some listener mail for your ears. And thank you, as always, for listening. And we'll see you here again. Until then, wag on, weirdos.
Wag on. Chinwag is a production of Treefort Media and Touchy Feely Films. Hosted and executive produced by Paul Giamatti and Stephen Asma. Executive producers for Treefort are Kelly Garner and Lisa Ammerman. Dan Carey is executive producer for Touchy Feely. Our series producer is Rachel Whitley Bernstein. Original theme music by Luke Top, with additional music by Via Mardot. Oscar Guido is our executive in charge of production. Tom Monahan is head of audio for Treefort. Audio production supervision by Matt Dyson. Editing and mixing by Jeff Neal. Animation created by Alex Sokol. Research assistance by Aidan Brooks. Lastly, for more information, go to chinwagpod.fm and find us on Instagram or TikTok at chinwagpod or on Twitter at chinwag_pod.